What do you want to ask? We have two Ukrainians and an American.
Do you feel safe, and how do you go about being safe?
My son today got learn how to ride the bicycle during air alarm sirens.
They have like the biggest country in the world, and they do nothing on that territory.
They don't develop these territories at all. So Ukraine gonna win. Democracy gonna win.
The creation of Russia is an original sin that stole from Ukraine.
Exactly. Exactly. You are perfectly right. Yes.
The guy who created Moscow, his name was Dolgoruki, and he was from the Ukrainian king's family.
It's a free society I've seen in all my travels of the world, even in wartime.
Hi, this is Joe Lindsley talking to you from Dnipro, Ukraine. So often I hear from American friends who have pretty basic questions about what it's like to live in life at war, or why is this war happening in Ukraine? And I thought it'd be great if we could share these types of conversations with the world. So here we share with you a conversation from last week. My friend James David Dickson, a great reporter from Michigan. For many years he worked with the Detroit News. He joins us to ask the questions that are on Americans' minds about Ukraine. And with me, I have my friend and co-host Zakhar Pikh, who was a bartender before the war, and also my friend Volodymyr Kebalo, who works with the Council of Europe and is a great civil society activist. So we got the perspectives of some great Ukrainians and the questions from the great American journalist James David Dickson in this episode of our Near Daily War Journal from UkrainianFreedomNews.com. Thanks for listening.
You're the floor to ask us some questions. You've worked many years at the Detroit News, covered crime and covered corruption and a lot of bullshit there. You're one of the most incisive commentators about the dilapidation of American media. And now you're working with the Mackinaw Center for Public Policy. So often I have friends call me from America and they're like, oh, what's it like in Ukraine? I said, I want to start sharing these conversations with the world.
Yes.
And I want to get the people that can ask us good questions. So I give the floor to you. What do you want to ask? We have two Ukrainians and an American.
First question I would love to ask you guys is, do you feel safe, and how do you go about being safe day to day?
Great questions, James.
Well, James, side note, Volodymyr works with the Council of Europe in Ukraine, and he's also a major civil society activist here in Ukraine.
Awesome.
My son today got learn how to ride the bicycle during air alarm sirens, and the street was full of kids. They were full of joy and happiness. That's it.
This is Zakhar Pikh, my friend from Lviv, who is now working with a European journalist in Kyiv.
We were hiding in a shelter in the metro station in the main square of Kyiv, on the Maidan Nezalezhnosti Square. I saw that in the shelter only me, my Dutch colleagues, and like a lot of Japanese journalists and any Ukrainian.
No Ukrainians.
We had alarms today in Kyiv the whole day. Like we had a pause between alarms like 20-13 minutes.
Yes. Yeah, true.
The American national anthem, we have the phrase bombs bursting in air. And that's why we light fireworks on July 4th to kind of celebrate that. What would Independence Day normally have looked like for you guys?
It's normally would like fireworks, bombs at Red Square in Moscow.
Before the war, what was Independence Day like in Ukraine before the war?
We had military parade. Also, we had the March of Veterans and a little show, like a concert with the singers.
We are speaking not about Independence Day of Ukraine. It's not a good term. It's a restoration of Ukrainian independence, of Ukraine statehood, because Ukrainian state was founded like more than 1,000 years ago. The first time like we had a great nation, it was like 1,000 years ago.
Well, but James, for example, the river. I'm talking to you from a riverbank right now, and on this river, 1,000 years ago, the Mongols were trying to invade Europe, and they tried to conquer the Ukrainians. And this river, the story of Zakhar Pikh, the same name as Zach, Zakhar the Falcon, and the villagers here. There was a movie made about this maybe a year ago. They were able to stop the Mongols at this point, and that's why this river is called the River Resistance. And so the people of these mountains and these steppes, the Cossacks and the Hutsuls and the Boykos, have fighting for their freedom just to live in their peaceful place for thousands of years.
Exactly, Joe, and that's why, like, Ukrainian was able to stop Mongols to conquer Europe 1,000 years ago. I don't understand what's wrong with Europe. They don't appreciate that Ukraine was a shield for Europe that time. And now history repeats. Ukraine is a shield for democracy again.
James, I'm going to give you the floor for the rest of this, but I want to explain. So Volodya, when the pandemic began, he works for the Council of Europe, which Ukraine is a member of, was a precursor to the European Union. But when the pandemic began, he began a civil society project to clean up the riverbank in his hometown. And Volodya, I think Volodya is one of the most eloquent speakers about what Ukrainian democracy is. The Ukrainians had the revolution in 2014 of Euromaidan, and Americans miss this. Joe Biden never mentions this. Like that, the Ukrainians in 2014, and Tucker Carlson does not understand this either. They kicked out the pro-Putin regime in 2014. Zach was in the streets, part of that revolution. Volodya was there too. Volodya can explain better, I think, than most people what Ukrainian democracy is. Normally today, Independence Day, everyone is wearing the traditional garments. That's called Veshivanka. So Ukrainians still are deeply tied to their tradition. This morning, I went to church with Volodya's family on Independence Day. That's what people do on Independence Day. You go to church, you praise God.
V, you mentioned winning. What does winning mean at this point? It's the same question I ask political candidates, right? Everybody wants to win. What do you think will happen? How do you think this war will actually end?
A very good question.
Fucking amazing question.
Ukraine gonna win. It's number one answer. Secondly, democracy gonna win. Democracy gonna spread all over the world because Ukraine wins, and Ukraine will spread democracy all over the world. That's my answer to your question.
Is that to say that winning would mean we want to go back to life as it was right before the war? Is that possible?
War started back in 2014. It's not a new war. It's
Right.
like another episode.
This is kind of like the Israel-Palestine, where it's ongoing. And this is just a particularly bad flare-up.
Ukraine has been for a war with Russia for, I think, more than 4 centuries, even more, maybe like 8 centuries or something. So they took all of our traditions, our artifacts, they took everything to Moscow. And Moscow was founded like in 13th century, right at the time. They took everything from Kyiv, because Kyiv at the time was very weak. Moscow, they subordinated to Mongols. They got on good terms with Mongol Empire. They just invaded Kyiv, took everything to Moscow, and started their country, importing everything the best from Kyiv Rus.
So what you're saying is the creation of Russia is an original sin that stole from Ukraine.
Exactly. Exactly. You are perfectly right, yes.
The guy who created Moscow, his name was Dolgoruki, and he was from the Ukrainian king's family. But he was thrown away from Kyiv because he was a motherfucker. And he went away to that fucking forest and thought, oh, I think it's a nice place for Moscow.
Yeah, just he was a prince of Moscow at that time, and Moscow at the time was like a swamp.
Dirt.
Russia, the term, it means Ukraine. Russia, it was stolen from Ukraine, the term, in 1709 or 1710, something like that. It was the great Moscow swamp. We are coming from real Russians, from Rus, Kievan Rus. We are not aggressors. We are peaceful people, democratic people, and I can tell you more about Kievan Rus democracy. But those peoples, they coming from Moscow swamps, they were real aggressors, and they want to conquer more and more lands. So this is a big difference, big difference.
They have like the biggest country in the world, and they do nothing on that territory.
They don't develop these territories at all, so it's like nothing. Yeah.
I got stuck in Ukraine happily, March 2020. I came here to give a lecture at a university. The borders closed because of the pandemic, and I had a chance to escape, but I realized that this is going to be one of the freest countries in the world during the pandemic, because Ukrainians, and some idiots in America say Zelensky's a dictator. It's ridiculous. Like, Ukrainians don't even listen to the police. You always have a conversation. You can negotiate anything. And as Zelensky said, every Ukrainian is president. It's very true. It's a free society I've seen in all my travels in the world, even in wartime. And that's what they've always been, going back to Cossack democracy. The Cossacks in central Ukraine had a constitution in 1711 with separation of powers. Before 1776, but Russia subjugated them as serfs and slaves. Also as an Irishman, like the way London tried to remove the Irish language and religion and culture. But the same way we see with Native Americans and with African Americans from America, like, with the treatment from the colonists and from Britain. Ukraine is a society that's always struggled for freedom, but they've held on to it. And this is the latest episode in that.
Right. Absolutely. So, guys, I have to ask a question from the American perspective. You know, certainly when the war started, you know, a lot of our politicians are cowardly. And so to see the president of a country actually stick around the war zone, we thought was very powerful. And over time, we've seen photo shoots, and it seems like it's become some other thing with the publicity. How is the president perceived, Zelensky?
Perceived in Ukraine, or
Because we are concerned that it's, you know, that perhaps at this point, if you're getting so much vanity out of this and you're hanging out with movie stars, maybe war is the best you've ever had it if you're the president.
No, for him it's the worst what could happen with him, because he wanted to become a president and to start build the country, to start do something like good for country, and he had a great plan for that. But now he's a hostage in this situation, and he cannot like a step back. He's making a great job now.
I think we're gonna judge people and judge our leaders by their decisions, and their decisions are decisive for our nations.
That Zelensky is so important as a symbol that he's basically hiding in plain sight.
I tell you my perspective. Zelensky is not important as a figure by himself. He is important as an institution. This institution for Ukraine was, for example, back in Cossack times, it was a hetman, democratically elected person, trusted by the public. And that's why Zelensky, I don't care about Zelensky. I just care about the institution of the presidency.
Yeah, we feel the same way in America, where, you know, Joe Biden, you know, is obviously not doing well, but you pray for the president, because, you know, America, we haven't had a president die in office since the 60s.
Oh, this is a very tough question. Maybe we'll have to make this for another future conversation, but like maybe, and you could even say Zelensky as the actor is acting more as president, as a chieftain, as a leader, as a hetman. The hetman, the ancient Cossack word for chieftain, more than Biden. I mean, you know, today Boris Johnson was in Kyiv. Boris Johnson came to Kyiv on the day of the greatest warnings from Washington intelligence since February 24th. So he, in a sense, risked his life to be here today. There's the leader. Joe Biden, it's a different story. I mean, it's a huge question of what is leadership? What is a leader? But Zelensky is fulfilling the role by his words, by his actions, by not fleeing Kyiv. He can probably ride a bicycle too without falling down. But I mean, it's like, you have to act the part. You know, it's not so hard, maybe.
The other half of the American question, it seems that regularly we see Zelensky himself or Biden on his behalf sending more money over and requesting more money. As people who are in Ukraine right now, do you feel it? Do you feel that but for this American money,
Ukraine right now is in a very horrible situation. This money America gives us, we appreciate a lot. Thank you very much. We have to think about, is it a loan or is it a gift for Ukraine? It's a big question, for example. It depends on the money.
And also on the money, we have to point out two things. One, when we look at there was a $9 billion of aid that came from America, for example, one of the packages. Only $3 billion of that was weapons that actually came to Ukraine. But those weapons had already been purchased. That was the value of the weapons that were sent to Ukraine. And so
Yeah,
the only actual
exactly. The rest was like a procurement program inside of the United States. And
well, so
yeah,
yeah, like it was. So the only cost at the moment was to transfer those weapons to Ukraine, and then 6 billion of that 9 billion. So 3 billion was for the weapons. 6 billion, James, was for the new weapons that the Pentagon was already going to buy anyway, but now they slid it into the Ukrainian aid package, the new weapons they wanted. So actually that's like, so out of that 9 billion, 3 billion was already spent. 6 billion is going to be spent for American weapons. And you probably only, you have like maybe some, I don't even, we can't find this number. It's very difficult, but less than $1 billion, hundreds of millions for the transfer of the weapons to Ukraine. And so, and this is the game American politicians play. They're like, oh, we gave lots of money to Ukraine, and they probably want people to get bored of Ukraine at some point. But there's not actually been these $40 billion showing up here in Ukraine. It's not.
Well,
It's not true.
Isn't that actually worse? Because you get all the credit for it without the benefit of it. And it kind of furthers that dynamic I was talking about earlier, where it creates perverse incentives, does it not, for this conflict to continue on when there's this huge gravy train attached to it.
First of all, it's not a conflict. It's a clash of civilizations. You have to bear in mind. It's a clash of good and bad. A friend of mine sent me an article of a conservative party or journalist in America saying Ukraine's war on Russia. What do you mean Ukraine's war on Russia? You crazy? It's a Russian invasion in Ukraine. It's a Russia genocide in Ukraine. Are you serious, real serious journalists, like naming this war? Ukraine's war with Russia. You kidding me or what?
In America, right, we're surrounded by 2 oceans and 2 friendly neighbors. We had some fear on Pearl Harbor. We had some fear on 9/11, but day to day, we're pretty safe, and we know that. Geographically, we're safe. You guys live next to the biggest bear there is. What is that like to have an actual dangerous neighbor and to be in actual danger now?
We don't know how to live another way, so we cannot compare that.
So it's always this Russia in the back of your head, knowing.
I think this war it was greatest catalyst for Ukraine just to bring together our nation.
From the beginning of the war, I told Ukrainians, there's a lot of Americans who I think are skeptical what's happening here, and that Ukrainians could not believe that because they live next to the big bad wolf, right? So they couldn't believe that anyone would see things otherwise. But across the world, people do see things differently. And so that's why it's important that we can have these types of conversations. James, I'll give you the last word, and then Zakhar, Volodymyr, close it out, please.
Well, hey guys, I want to thank you for your time and just say, stay safe. We hope you are. We can't imagine it. And I live a mile from Detroit, okay? The most dangerous city in Michigan. And honestly, it doesn't affect me. I could choose to go there. I could choose to not go there. They're certainly not going to invade. So you guys are in a unique situation. It's like being the Michigan football team and having to play Ohio State every year. Like, you have to play a top competitor regularly for the last 1,000 years. So God bless you.
It was Joe Lindsley from Skola, Ukraine. It was Volodymyr Kebalo from Skola, Ukraine as well. Our guest, James Dickson, Michigan, United States, and your favorite Zakhar Pikh. It was new daily war journal. Yeah, right? Yeah. Speak shitty, speak freely. Keep safe, as you said. Yeah, James. Thank you so much and have a good night.
Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава.
Героям слава. Thank you to the United States. James, thank you, my friend. And
Hey,
good
thanks,
night to y'all.
guys. Appreciate you.
До побачення. До побачення. Good night.